Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us at the MarketSite studio, we have Giang Bui. She's the head of U.S. Equities and Exchange-Traded Products at Nasdaq to discuss the process for getting a spot Bitcoin ETF to market. Giang, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thank you for having me, Jill.
Certainly a hot topic. Can you give us an overview on what's going on with these spot Bitcoin ETF proposals?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the effort to bring a spot Bitcoin ETF to market has been spanning over a decade. All the previous proposed spot Bitcoin ETFs had been rejected by the SEC over the past 10 years, but there's been a recent wave of new filings for spot Bitcoin ETFs. So there's now over 10 filings from 10 different issuers, that is currently in the works with the SEC to be able to be reviewed and hopefully approved to launch a spot Bitcoin ETFs. And with that, we're supporting iShares and Valkyrie in their efforts to launch a spot Bitcoin ETF. So, there's been some recent developments with the DC Courts of Appeal ruling in Grayscale's favor that the SEC has to review their rejection for Grayscale to convert their Bitcoin trust to an ETF. So, that's really has been a development that we're monitoring closely in terms of how it will impact our filings.
What makes spot Bitcoin ETF so special?
Yeah, so there's currently in the market today in the US, there's ETFs that provide exposure to the movement of the Bitcoin futures, or there's ETFs that provides exposure to companies that are active in the Bitcoin ecosystem, but there's nothing that provides direct exposure to the spot price of Bitcoin. So a spot Bitcoin ETF would provide investors another choice to be able to have that exposure. It could be potentially more attractive than the different way to access Bitcoin today if an investor doesn't want to have to secure and join the different platforms and secure it themselves. And a Bitcoin ETF also could potentially have different investor protections, given that it's going to be regulated by the SEC and traded on exchange. It could potentially be used as a hedging vehicle. So there's really the product is really about choice for investors to access Bitcoin.
How do spot Bitcoin ETFs differ from typical ETF filings?
Yeah, so for spot Bitcoin ETFs, it's considered a commodity ETF. So similar to other commodity-based ETFs like gold ETFs, there is a more extensive rule filing and review process that needs to be done because as an exchange, we don't have standard rules that allows us to just list it without going to the SEC first. So to bring a spot Bitcoin ETF to market, what would have to happen is the issuer like iShares or Valkyrie would file a Form S1 with the SEC. That is their registration statement for the product. The listing exchange, in this case Nasdaq, we will file a Form 19B4 with the SEC to amend our rules to allow us to list and trade the ETF. So the two different filings, they're reviewed by two different parts of the SEC and on different timelines. So I think when you hear a lot of the conversations about the previous rejections, that's referring to the timeline of the 19B4 that the exchange files. So once the exchange filed the 19B4, the SEC has 7 business days to review and reject the filing if it doesn't conform to their form and procedures. And so at this point, it's strictly procedural, and it's not an indication about the viability of the product. So after the 7 business days from filing, the SEC will publish it to their website and the Federal Register, and that's when the timeline kicks off for their review of the filing. So there's several milestones along the way of dates that the SEC needs to approve or disapprove or extend their decision by. So, the clock can run all the way up to 240 calendar days for the SEC to fully review. And all the previous 19B4s for Bitcoin had been approved around that 240-day mark. So we are approaching one of our deadlines, and that's going to be coming up in mid-October. So we're watching that date very closely.
Why has the SEC rejected previous spot Bitcoin ETFs?
Yeah, so the SEC had, in their previous disapproval orders, has talked about how the exchange failed to be able to describe how their proposal is consistent with preventing fraud and manipulation in the trading of these products, and has investor protections in place to support that product filing. So the SEC explains that a comprehensive surveillance sharing agreement with an underlying regulated market of significant size in the underlying or in Bitcoin would help be able to prevent fraud and manipulation, because their thinking is that if someone is looking to manipulate the price of the ETF, they'll likely need to be trading on this significant size market for the underlying. So that's really where they really leaned in on having a comprehensive surveillance sharing agreement would really help prevent fraud and manipulation.
Got it. Giang, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.